touch-tone phone. Today's conference is being recorded. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. I would now like to turn the meeting over to Glenn Pass, Program Manager. Sir, you may begin.
Hey there, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us for the second faculty webcast of the season. We have a very exciting program put together for you today. We're going to be talking all about visualizations and renderings and really thinking about how we're using them in the classroom and how that's changing over time. So we have a very exciting panel of guests kind of lined up to kind of share their best ideas and best practices with you. And just to kind of introduce everyone and get it started, let's go ahead and we'll go around the room and kind of introduce everyone. What's happening is, I'm Glenn Cass. I'm an ADC specialist working for Autodesk. I have quite a bit of background in teaching, BIM, and visualization, and I've been teaching at Stanford University for several years in the program there in the Department of Civil Engineering. So we're going to be sharing some of our best ideas based on sort of that experience. And what I'm seeing as I visit classrooms around the country, working with different faculty and students in terms of trying to incorporate some of these tools. We are also joined by Professor Ming Tang at the University of Cincinnati. So, Ming, why don't you go again? Ming is actually a fantastic person who's really one of the superstars in the world of rendering and visualization. I've actually learned quite a bit from him. Ming, why don't you go and introduce yourself a little bit to the audience so they get a sense of who you are and what you're up to.
Hello everyone, my name is Ming Tang. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Cincinnati. I have taught many different computer-related classes besides Studio since 2003. And the tools I use mainly cover modeling, visualization, simulation, analysis. So today I'm really happy to have this opportunity to be here, share with you my thoughts, my experience using Autodesk products.
Fantastic. Okay, the third member of our panel, a very distinguished guest, is Mr. Chris Peterson, who's actually a third-year architecture student at Penn State, who's actually been doing quite a bit on his own work, his own project work with visualization and rendering, but he also teaches the other students at Penn State and helps hold workshops and classes. Chris, why don't you tell us a little about yourself?
Sure. I'm actually originally from the Chicago area, and so I came out here to Penn State for the 5-year program, and I developed an affinity for these visualization programs and really thought how to communicate my ideas in the clearest way I could so everyone could understand what exactly I was trying to accomplish with my projects. And through my experience, I actually was able to lead a workshop with another student on teaching other students how to render and import from Revit and things like that. And so from that, I became a student expert in the Autodesk program.
Fantastic, fantastic. And we can talk a little bit more about that later. There's a program, Autodesk Student Experts, where we actually work with students and faculty on different campuses to help support the students and really make sure they're getting software support and just the assistance they need to be successful. So it's a great program, and if it hasn't yet started on your campus, we should talk about that a little bit later too. So let's go ahead and kind of talk about a little bit, set the stage what we're going to be talking about today, and then we'll just kind of dive on in. And the way this will work is we'll open up the lines for questions kind of later, like in the process. But I think in the whole GoToWebinar interface, if you have a question, something you want to like kind of throw into the mix, it's really meant to be a kind of engaged discussion. So please go ahead and just type anything you want to into the GoToWebinar chat window. We'll try to respond to that stuff kind of as it comes up, and then we'll just throw open the lines for the voice questions that's towards the end of the session. So, like, please, be involved, be proactive, and like get engaged in the discussion, because it really is all about helping you kind of figure out what's going to be most appropriate in your classroom. So here's basically the context or the stage to get us going. The idea is, in thinking about visualization and rendering, things have changed quite a bit over the years. And there's some fantastic tools that are out there, so we'll be showing some specific things about what we can be doing in some of the tools like Autodesk Revit that let us do a lot of visualization right within the modeling environment, but also thinking about some very advanced tools that are very immersive and let people really play around with interacting with data, like Autodesk Showcase, 3ds Max, and Ming's a real expert in Maya. We'll talk about that too. But really think about how some of these tools fit together, but even more important than the tools, we want to think about really how visualization is being used in your classroom and in your studio as part of the whole process. Because Ming and I were talking about this a little bit yesterday. When we were in school, you would go ahead and if you wanted to go ahead and do a rendering or visualization of some type, you do your modeling and you set it all up with all the parameters very carefully defined, send it off to some rendering program and probably just go home overnight. So it's going to take 8 or 10 hours to give you a little postage-sized rendering that was really sort of a static image of what's going on. And the way the whole process worked is we didn't really do rendering in a very dynamic way because it was really just too much time. It was too much effort. Somehow it didn't have the fluidity and wasn't able to sort of contribute to our design process as much as it might be able to. And that's what we really want to talk about as being radically changed right now. A lot of the tools, a lot of what we have available today really enable us to bring rendering and visualization just really fundamentally into the design process. So at every step of the way we can think about the materials, the lighting, the overall user experience of kind of how they'll see the space, not only as designers, but we can also use these kind of very advanced tools to get people who are going to be consuming the design involved in understanding through better renderings really what the product is actually going to be like. So it's also about kind of engaging the people who we're actually serving and getting them involved in the design process to better renderings too. So that's kind of an overall context. But Ming, do you want to sort of add some more to that? Because I think you're seeing this very much in your classroom right now, just about this whole notion of how things are changing because of the way rendering is really and visualization to be a much more integral part of the process.
So exactly. We have a very tight corner system here in Cincinnati. So basically, students only have 2 weeks to produce the design project. So very tight, very fast. And we are really encouraging students to actually use visualization as a design tool, happen in the very early design stage, rather than just have a good looking photorealistic thing at the end. So that means you have to break down the whole visualization components in the very early design stage. For example, the sketch style rendering is very important, very valuable. You can quickly visualize the ideas, and then we introduce some of the course about advanced rendering with daylighting. That is happening in the middle stage. Students can set up a particular day or time. You can see how the shadows can be analyzed based on Autodesk Revit, GDI Studio, and also Maya program can all do this kind of function. At the end of the quarter, close to week 8, week 9, that is the point we introduce more about advanced visualization. For example, slide-through animation, interactive presentation. We can use the model as a way to convince the audience their design. We can also use it to actually communicate with people who are not necessarily in the design field. So we think it's a very powerful way visualization happens in a multiple timelines rather than happen as it can.
Fantastic, fantastic. I think that's really going to be one of the themes throughout the discussion here. It's really different types of visualizations for different times in the process. But everything doesn't have to be the perfect photorealistic rendering. There's an awful lot we can get out of sort of intermediate renderings and more stylistic things to help us convey our design intent kind of early on. Well, let's go ahead. Let me dive in, just kind of show some very basic things. I'm going to start with just basically looking at a modeling tool, Revit, okay, that we work with quite a bit, and just kind of show some very quick examples of really even how we can start playing around within the modeling tool to get better visualizations. And then Chris will kind of pick up this thread a little bit and sort of demonstrate a little bit more about what he's doing. So basically, if we're looking at this view, this is a view in Revit of this sample house. This view is kind of very typical of what it looks like in a hidden line view. It's kind of a little cartoony in terms of what's going on, but we can start adding to this very, very quickly. For example, right now, it's kind of a very flat view that doesn't really have much definition to it. We can do things like just add shadows to it to start to kind of give a little more definition to what's going on. There's also really a whole host of different visual styles and things that we can do to kind of make this a little bit better. For example, there's a whole series of graphic display options that right within the modeling environment let us go through and do things like, for shadows, let me turn on ambient shadows, which you'll see sort of give it an overall soft effect. So as opposed to just the harsh shadows, we're starting to see the effect of light bouncing off the ground, things like that. Now, we can kind of continue to work into sort of these hidden line views, but we can also start getting into either shaded views that sort of start to incorporate the colors of the different materials. And a lot of Revit models tend to look like this. People sort of go to that level and they sort of look at the views in this way. But a really exciting development that happened last year was we actually started to go ahead and be able to have the realistic materials, the photorealistic materials, or appearance of the materials actually appear in these views too. So we can even go ahead and, it happened last year, the 2012 version turn up to realistic modeling or viewing, which then lets us actually go through and apply. It's just the photorealistic with the geo maps, kind of these things. Okay, still not quite as good as a complete ray tracing, but it's getting pretty close. So if I'm just going through and doing my basic modeling, having this sort of feedback to really start to understand what the material quality, what the lighting and shadow quality is, it's starting to give me some really quick feedback that I can work with, and this is still an active model. I can still go through and make my changes to the model, you know, go through and raise that door if I want to. It's not going to be very sensible, but just as a illustration. Actually, hang on. Well, whatever. Let me do that. This is a metric unit thing, so you're not seeing much of a difference. Well, that wasn't a very big difference either. And then you go ahead and sort of change the model. The model elements are still active. We can also go through, and a kind of exciting feature that got added this year is you'll see there's sort of a blue gradient background to this, which again is okay as a representation of the sky. But you can actually start doing things like just adding in, let me kind of put in there, in the background, as opposed to a gradient image, just put an image back there. And that'll let me go through and actually just apply a photographic image. So, for example, I can pull out, if I want sort of a sunlit sky, something like that. Or if I go out to my desktop, you can really find all sorts of different images. We can find things on the web. You can take photos of different images that are sort of realistic for the context. So, for example, if I'm putting a building in a cityscape, I can put an entire city back in there. So let me just go for more of a blue sky here as opposed to that sunlit sky. But we can start creating some very nice visual effects just right within the Revit modeling environment and start to understand our design there and still have access to the actual modeling tool. So visualization and modeling at the same time, we can think about how they interact with each other. Now, Chris, let me go ahead and hand it over to you. If you could go ahead and show about the ray tracing, that'd be fantastic. It's sort of a new feature available this year. Let me pass over the screen if I can. And I'll do that by, I'll stop sharing. And then, Chris, why don't you go ahead and grab on and take us for a spin.
Sure thing. All right, so I have the same Revit project, the sample project here, and pretty much, so yeah, Glenn showed you the realistic view, which is pretty nice for, say you have different materials, different images on these walls or on the ground, and you can see, okay, well, this is how it would look. Here's a bit of some realistic shading going on. But to take it one step farther, Autodesk actually introduced the 2013 version of this ray trace feature. So once you click on that, it'll load up the feature. This is kind of what this is doing, but it pretty much does an iterative render, which it goes in passes. It basically just refines the image and produces a semi-realistic look. There's obvious grain, but the speed of this render is.
Actually, Chris, I'm wondering. I think maybe your screen may have frozen on the transmission side. Can you go ahead and just I'll go through the ray tracing. We can still hear you just fine, but we'll see if we can kind of reconnect you back in again.
Sure.
Can you get to the Adobe Connect window and
Excuse me, not responding actually. I guess I'll have to exit out and come back in.
Okay, why don't you try that? See if you can, and I'm sorry for that, folks.
No, I apologize.
A little bit of technology hassle here, but let's see if we can get back and get the screen back in again here. Go ahead and see if I can get remote control. There we go. Okay, we'll bring Chris back on here in a second. There's always room for technological hassle, but what Chris was basically sort of demonstrating or telling us about was that also within Revit now we have a really nice mode called ray tracing. And if we turn on ray tracing, we'll actually go one step further where, very much like what we would do in the rendering mode, okay, we can actually start going through and doing a real-time rendering of what's going on here. And the nice part about this rendering mode is, if we decide that we want to change our positioning or we want to look at something a little bit different, it's grainy for just half a second there, but it'll catch up really quickly. And let us go ahead and kind of navigate around the different positions or orbit that around. Yeah, but we're starting getting sort of of an unprecedented level of kind of immediacy of feedback in terms of the rendering right in the modeling environment. So that, again, if we want to go through and make a change in the modeling environment, we can do that and see what the impact on the rendering is, which is really within a matter of seconds as opposed to waiting for 8 hours. So, yeah, that's kind of the, one of the kind of really cool things that's available within Revit as the modeling environment right now. And before we go anything else, and I'd love to kind of talk to, so, for me and for Chris, how is this immediacy, this ability to go ahead and render and understand things in the modeling environment and really kind of do it in a very real-time way, how is that sort of changing things? Like, do you have any examples you can show that sort of, illustrate the power of, doing the rendering in a modeling environment, or just a general comments about that? So, like, Dean, do you have anything you can show us in terms of, like, some examples that actually show the power of the rendering within Revit?
Absolutely.
Let me go ahead and I'll shift it back over to you. And I'll stop sharing. And then why don't you go ahead and grab control and show us some examples of what you and your students have been working on.
Sure. Here you can see this is actually Revit rendering of a building. A real project we worked with Parkinson Real last quarter, a 10-story building in Chicago. So this studio is focused on the building scheme, and how you can redesign the building scheme to have a more environmental friendly materials, and how you break down the building patterns in a very meaningful way. So this is actually all handled with Revit Cloud rendering. Students can quickly have their design solutions uploaded into the Revit Cloud server, and then when the rendering done is pushed to our site, and then they can produce multiple iterations. They can compare the different solutions, and then sometimes they can transfer this into EcoTech and other analysis software to get feedback, and then quickly revisit the Revit model, and then re-render this in a very quick fashion. Sure. So it became a really powerful way to evaluate these design solutions.
Fantastic. Actually, since you brought it up, we should go ahead and comment on the cloud rendering in terms of how that works. So if people haven't experienced it yet, basically what happens is all the members of the student community, so faculty and students, anyone who has an account on the student community, and we'll show you how to log on to that a little bit later, has access to, it's really cloud rendering units. And for every one of the student accounts, as well as faculty accounts, you get what's called 75 cloud rendering units. And how the basic system works is you load up a view that you would like to go ahead and have rendered, and you basically send it off to the Autodesk server. So rather than waiting for that rendering to take place on your machine, where it could tie up several hours, or we've all had this experience where you go into the lab and, there's a machine that's sort of dedicated to doing some rendering. Someone put a piece of paper over it saying, please do not disturb. We're hoping for the best, but they're leaving it overnight. And a lot of times that doesn't work out successfully for people because the next class comes in and does disturb. So that's really not a good way to do it. Cloud rendering is sort of the perfect solution for that because you can load up the rendering, put it up on the servers, let it work overnight, and you get an email message when the rendering is actually done and you can pull things down. So very cool service. We can talk some more about that. It also sort of has some very cool new unique views. For example, in cloud rendering, as opposed to still shots, we can actually do panoramas, which let us position the camera in a space and rotate around. So you have more of an interactive experience where you can look around and kind of see things in a photorealistic way, in a 360-degree view. So very cool things. But as I look at these, and I'm understanding sort of the translucency or the transparency of the panel elements and kind of these screening elements, really visualization is the only way to capture an accurate feel for that, and that I think is really critical for the design. So I think it's a really very successful example to kind of illustrate that.
Another element I want to point out is that the cloud rendering is very useful if you have design iterations. For example, you want to compare two different materials or two different lighting designs. You can quickly just upload both of them to the cloud server, and then you can get the result immediately. You don't have to testing one and then after another one. You can do multiple designs at the same time.
Fantastic. So, Chris, from your perspective, as you hear us talk about the cloud rendering, or even this whole notion of doing the rendering right within Revit, in terms of that, is this something? Are you doing a lot of visualization right within Revit in your own work right now? I know you also do a lot of 3ds work and sort of advanced work, but I'm about just in terms of working within Revit and the immediacy? How does that sort of like resonate with what you need to do as a student?
Well, it gives a really good preview before I export to 3ds Max, so I don't have to go back and forth between the two programs and kind of do a guess and check situation. It's really nice, especially with the realistic view in Revit, because it's very interactive. You can orbit around with ease, and you can adjust the doors and whatever materials, different materials, and it updates in a semi-realistic manner. And there has been a lot of talk about cloud rendering, actually. Students do use it for their projects. It's starting to catch on, and it produces pretty good results, and I think it's gaining popularity.
Fantastic. Now, I think it's really, we've only introduced that recently, but as soon as students sort of find out about it, it's like this hidden secret. It's this gem you want to know about because, towards the end of the project, especially towards the end, there's a time when you really want to create some very high-quality renderings and no one wants to tie up the whole machine. But again, putting it in context, for the shorter-term renderings, for the immediate feedback, I'd like to do that right within Revit and kind of get the real quickness. But I'm going to say my cloud rendering units for like the big ones that are going to take the hours just so I don't have to wait for that on my machine. I think that's one thing for us all we got to think about is really, what's immediate and what's longer term and how to use that as a resource most effectively. Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you, Nick, for going through sharing that stuff. Let me go ahead and throw another kind of technology out on the table, because I think it's also kind of a very groundbreaking one. Let me kind of introduce the whole notion of Showcase, which is really all about interactive presentation. And then we'll go ahead and take a look at some of your examples and some of the visualizations and meeting some more of yours and kind of just kind of put it all in context. So let me go ahead and I will just switch on over. Let me share my screen. And we'll say that, okay, we've been looking at this model kind of more in the Revit mode, and let me go through and switch over to a different mode. Okay. This is actually the same model imported to a program called Showcase. And it's actually very easy to get the model over here to Showcase. Let me see if I can get it out there. There's the basic model. If I want to go through and take something to Showcase, or really to 3ds Max, it's the same sort of process. What I'm going to do is do an export, and I can take it out as an SBX file. SBX file being, it's Photobox. One of our colleagues looked it up and kind of shared that with us yesterday. So it's a good format for exporting things that's very commonly used for getting kind of rendering outputs across. So let's go through and take a look at the same sort of project over in Showcase and show you what it looks like. Now, Showcase in many ways looks very similar, although you might start to see that it has some interesting subtleties to it. The shadows actually look pretty good. You'll notice what I'm doing is actually I'm going rolling in, zooming out. I can orbit around the project very easily in terms of what's going on. I can navigate through the project. So, for example, I can zoom on in, or I can even walk on in. And as I'm walking in, I think you can sort of see that the quality of the visuals is actually very good right now. The rendering of the materials actually looks pretty good. When I get right up close to that wooden wall surface, it looks pretty good. When I zoom on in and go into the house, I'm actually getting a pretty good look at what the concrete wall surfaces are going to look like, the red beams, the pieces of furniture, things like that. So it's just kind of an interactivity to Showcase, which is really its key sort of feature in terms of thinking about what it's very good for. And how that really plays into our design process is it really starts to encourage sort of a fluidity and a playing with different things. So I'm going to show you what I sort of mean by that. So, for example, one thing that's really kind of nice to play with is this notion of really what are your materials, and really, should that be a wood wall or should it be something else? In the Showcase environment, we can go ahead and select that wood wall. Let me go ahead and pull up a material library, and I will choose all the objects that are using that wood wall, so I can take a look at them all together. Now let's go around to the material library looking for something else. For example, if I wanted to go through and kind of consider what the effect of maybe putting masonry on those walls instead would be. So I can go to masonry bricks. I'll choose another material, okay, and apply it just that easily. Or apply kind of something that looks like this. Or something that looks like this. And as we go through and apply these different surfaces, there's sort of a fluidity with which I'm doing this, which is really hard to beat. Like if I had to set that up, change all the material settings, and take that out to 3ds Max or a standard rendering tool, that would take quite a while to do something like that. can be accelerated, you know, to the point where you set up something called alternatives. Let me show you how those work. Alternatives are really just sets of different materials, and I've set up a couple different ones for this model, where, for example, I can look at the wood wall, but if I want to real quickly kind of check out that concrete block wall or the brick wall, I can take a look at that. But I can do that with other materials, too. I could say, what if it wasn't grass? What if it was more of a cobblestone surface? Or what if it was cobblestone with that cross block wall? Or even in terms of things like the materials colors. We have the red beams, we can take out blue beams or green beams, we can check out sort of all sorts of different options. Even go through and change things like the mullions. And really go through and combine these together in different things. So I could say, well, what if it was blue beams and blue mullions and wood? Or you got sort of playing with it. But this sort of communication really not only is cool for me as a designer to be able to play this way, but also when I'm interacting with clients or I'm interacting and explaining people about what the alternatives are for the project, just the ability to kind of really manipulate the model very quickly. It's kind of very, it's engaging and it lets us get through a whole lot of power in terms of exploring different options. Now, I've been playing around just with playing with materials, but we got to show you another thing that I think is really kind of cool with the map, and that's the whole notion of playing with the position of different elements. So, for example, let me just orbit this around a little bit so you sort of get a better sense. Like right now, I'm looking at that model, and the roof is flat on down top of the building. If I go through and say, what would it look like if I topped the roof? Or even, what would happen if I topped the roof and actually topped the beams off? Okay. I start having sort of very interesting sort of environmental things here to play with. So I can go through and change those different states, kind of do it from really any perspective that makes sense. I can look at the inside of the building, the outside of the building. But the ability to kind of really start exploring the model this way is really very, very powerful in terms of really letting you start to understand and play with your design. So actually, for this one, I know me, you have a really fantastic example of this where you do something with a dynamic facade. Can you go ahead and share that with us?
Absolutely.
Okay, let me go ahead and I'll share it back over to you. And we'll do that. Let's stop the sharing there on my side. And then why don't you guys take it away, show us really how you were able to use that to really explore and kind of explain the facade.
All right. This is the project from student. His name is John. It's the same student skin studio. What he designed is a very complex kinetic system. So this building panel system can actually move around across the surface. So it's a quite complex concept, and we found out Autodesk Showcase is a very powerful way to allow us to actually be able to visualize how these panels are moved. Along this track system, we can evaluate how these panels look like in a different transparency, in a different material. We can quickly click around different design solutions and then find the ideal way to move these panels. So it does give us a lot of this kind of freedom or confidence to say, hey, this design solution actually works. We have proof that through this digital prototype.
I'm loving this dynamic quality that you can actually feel kinetic panels move because, just capturing that as a series of different photographs, it wouldn't be nearly as powerful as actually seeing all those panels like slam shut.
Exactly. If we render this through other animation program, it take a lot of time, at least hours, to get the same result. But here, everything is really fast. It's a zero rendering time. All the images are handled by the GPU directly. It is extremely effective.
Got it. So as we're going through and we're using something like Showcase to do this, does it change the quality of the experience with the reviewers? The fact that you can start interacting with it, directly, as opposed to like a canned image where you can't really change the movie, but that you can actually get in and start manipulating things directly. How does that change the whole experience of working with reviewers and getting them to sort of start engaging with the model?
Well, I think the way the interactive adaptation is more close to the actual experience we have in the physical world. So it's kind of not very natural. You can actually select the view angles. You can manipulate the cameras. You can make decisions based on that particular point. So we can have the students or the designers as the clients, for me as an advisor, can sit in front of the computer at the same time. We can say, hi, can you change this material to this way? Can you adjust the height of this, student flags? Can you find other ways to organize these panels? So it definitely gives us a lot of these kind of common elements we can discuss at the same time.
So Chris, are you using the Showcase at all in the classes at Penn State yet, or is it still sort of an undiscovered secret? Like, how does the visualization happen there? I know some happens within Revit. Is anyone using Showcase there yet?
No, actually, it seems like it's something that's kept secret. I've never actually used Showcase, but just by looking at it here, it seems like something that I would really want to delve into. It gives great interactivity with the renders and how you can see what it would really look like and from any angle, pretty much, and something I would want to look into.
Fantastic. Actually, Ming, why don't you turn it over back to me again? I'll show one more thing about Showcase, and then, actually, Chris, I want to start talking about some of your renderings, because there's a whole issue about the style of rendering, and I think some of yours do a really good job of sort of illustrating that. Let me go ahead and share my screen again, just real briefly. And here I'm back to my model. Let me put the roof back on, and we'll orbit that back up again. One thing that actually is very, very kind of good about Showcase is we can actually put things into environments. So, for example, right now it's a little bit plain right now. So my studio project is sort of sitting out there in a big white space, and that's not very good in terms of understanding it. I can go through and do things. So let me go ahead and load in an environment library. And I'm just going to go ahead and try putting this project in the middle of a grassy field and just sort of get a sense of what I'm up to in a second here. There we go. Now, what's the advantage of doing something like this? Well, now I can actually, if I have an environment, actually start to understand the project like in the context of what it's around. So if it's going to be out in the middle of a big grassy field, that's fine. But if instead, if I want it to be in a more urban environment, for example, let me put it down on the docks. I can do that. That doesn't look very good in terms of where I want that one. Let me go ahead and, how about, let's put it down on the dry lake. Now, as we go through and do things like this, every once in a while I'll need to do a little bit of corrections to your model. I'll comment on that. For example, since this model already has a ground plane in it, I might want to just take that out. And I can take that out right in Showcase. And then I can even do things like adjust the context a little bit. If I have something, let me look at the scene settings. I'll find it in a second. There we are. I'm just going to raise the ground plane up a little bit so that this thing that was built on a hillside is actually sort of more submerged in the ground. Okay. So there again we have it. We can start thinking about it in different ways. This ability to really go ahead and show projects in context, again, I think is really, really powerful because no project stands on its own. It's really important to sort of understand the surrounding context and start to, put the building in relationship or your boat design relationship to the other things. So, now, Chris, I know you have some fantastic examples, not in Showcase, but actually just some of the work you've done in 3DS and some of the work you've done in Revit that kind of really do a great job of illustrating buildings in their context and thinking about the styles and shadows. So can you share some of those with us?
Sure, I can do that.
Let me go ahead and I'm going to stop sharing, and let's see if we get your screen to kind of cooperate with you this time. I have a couple of projects that we'd great to look at.
All right, let's see. Is it go? Is it good?
I think yes, we're looking at like your browser window right now.
Great. Okay, so here is the website where I put all my work, my professional photo of me. And so one of the projects is a library in Pittsburgh, and we're actually just finishing that project up right now. And I actually, for this project, I modeled the entire project using 3ds Max. Up until this project, I'd use mostly Revit for the modeling, but I figured I'd mix it up a little bit and see what I can come up with using 3ds Max. But I've always been rendering in 3ds. I've found that it's one of the easiest programs to set it up, get the exposure right, get the lighting correct, and produce some really interesting results. Basically what I've been doing is not necessarily photorealistic rendering. For A couple reasons. One is what I always try to think of what image would get my ideas across. Maybe not a photorealistic rendering, maybe something that would really accentuate my ideas behind the building. And the second reason is they would take a bit longer to render themselves. Each of these images took less than 2 hours, and they're 4,000 pixels wide. So, it's great on time because there's so many settings that you can optimize your renders for. So yeah, in terms of context, in sort of stylistic manner, for this image at night, I took a photo of the existing conditions on the site, which includes the road, the surrounding buildings here, and then I made a render, and I just kind of put it in using image editor. I usually use Photoshop, and then I kind of adjusted the scene, turn it to kind of a dusk time, and I shaded in, I ghosted in the cars so you can see my building behind them, but you still understand what is there in the context, and it gives the project a sense of scale.
Fantastic, and I think Ming and I were talking about this a little bit. Comment on that whole issue of that photorealistic versus stylistic, and really, what that actually does in terms of, when you think about it in terms of dealing with clients, or even how it sort of affects the whole studio review process as you're creating things.
Number one, I think Chris did a wonderful job about this rendering. I can clearly see the idea about these individual parts being clustered together has been really easy to read from this rendering. So that's actually going to back to the discussion we had before this, is what is the purpose of this visualization will serve. I think if the clients are in the very early design stage, if everything is not being confirmed yet, I think a very sketch style rendering will actually make the things going forward. But at that point of time, if everything is photorealistic, that can make the client be scared. And if they thought, well, everything has been confirmed. So definitely there is some kind of, these communication issues to have to think about. Is what kind of style is that appropriate style at that point of time.
Yeah, I know. If I go to reviews, one of the things I always like, I like the images to sort of have the same degree of finality that the design process sort of has. So I don't like really finished design at a very early stage because it sort of implies more finality than it really has. So great. Now these are some really fantastic things. That's what we're looking at here. These are some very ethereal.
Yeah, this is just the view upon the entrance of the building during the daytime now. There's an auditorium in the project, so I made that clear with some 3D text. And then since it is a library, I made that apparent by when you walk in, you see the connection to the stacks above. Yeah, it's not, it's not quite photorealistic, but it gives these kind of floating boxes. It gives, it kind of shows off what I'm trying to do here. It's like these clusters of boxes that are knit together.
Sure. And I think you're onto a good point there because it's all, we're all about communicating our design intent. It's not about creating a pretty picture. We got to do whatever communicates your design with us.
Yeah, I think Chris did a wonderful job to tell the stories about the connectivity of this virtual space. That is what you want to highlight as a focal point. I think this rendering does tell that story very well.
Now, Chris, I know you also had some other ones. They were we want to call more highly stylized, things that have like wireframes and it's just things that I almost think about as being earlier in the process.
So for you mean like the other projects, like the section perspective, or the elevation views? I'll show you these. So for this kind of view, it is obviously not photorealistic again, but a major part of this view is that I wanted to give it context. I wanted to show my building and its surroundings and how it fits in to just to the surrounding area and community. So I actually used Google Street View, and I just took and I put them in on the sides of the building to kind of emphasize the building and how it fits in. And again, it's highly stylized, but I think it works. It tries to get my point across.
Actually, I think you're onto a good point there even. I love the idea of, whether it's Google Street View or just whatever it is that we have as image sources. There's a lot of good places to get imagery now that, as opposed to trying to model everything in 3D, if we have nice imagery and we can use that to set the context, but again, it's not only sort of easier to do, but it actually is much more efficient rendering-wise. Actually, yesterday we were talking about that issue about trees and, whether it's better to put a photo of a tree or actually do a 3D model. You want to comment on that?
Oh yeah, we discussed this is what is the best way to produce large number of trees.
Yeah, so if we model them all in 3D, there's so many polygons and there's so many shadows, it could take forever. Where a lot of times a photo of a tree will do just as good a job of communicating what we want.
Yes, exactly. So that's, I think, going back to the discussion we had before, is what is the intent purpose of this visualization and rendering.
Actually, a good point also that I think that Chris comes out of your work is really, there's no one right solution that kind of takes care of all our rendering needs, and it really becomes more about a workflow that ties together different tools. So like me, in terms of, we have Revit, we showed Showcase, 3ds Max, and you do a lot of work in Maya. Yeah. So talk about like how easy it is to move models back and forth between those things. Is that, Yeah.
Well, number one, I think Autodesk did a wonderful job to allow the files can be transferred across the different software very easily. Like the SPX file format, also for the Showcase, you can pretty much take in whatever file format from any other 3D program. So that really makes the things much, much easier to take out the files in the rendering engine. The second thing, I think, for the 3ds Max or Maya or even some rendering engines, they all take a very similar concept about how to simulate materials, how to get reflections, how to calculate the lighting through the translucent materials. So that kind of knowledge is consistent. If you have spent time, say, learn one program, like in Revit, you have a good understanding about the materials and shaders, that knowledge can be easily transferred into 3ds Max or Maya. So you don't really have to learn from scratch, from zero.
Fantastic, fantastic. I think it's a really important point that it really is. It's all about a workflow that makes sense. We're not losing work. We're getting sort of the easier transfer. And we're really, it's only because of the fluidity of that you really encourage people to sort of play and sort of do this at all these different levels. Okay. Relative to like what's going on in the whole webinar, let me because we can show a lot of other things that we think are really cool. But let's kind of throw it open to the audience for like questions and answers. So operator, if you can go ahead and open up the line and just start taking questions, that'd be fantastic. How about like as we're answering questions, Dean, why don't you go ahead and grab the screen and just like search, show some of your images in the background as we're like taking Q&A. But operator, if you can take it open, let's just like answer people's Q&A and like hopefully get you involved in the whole process. Because really, again, the point is not just to show you all this cool stuff, but to answer your questions about how this might work.
Thank you. If you would like to ask a question over the phone, please press *1, unmute your line, and record your name. 1 moment, please.
Very good. As we're waiting for the first question to come in, I know one thing that someone was asking about that got typed in had to do with the cloud rendering and the units and how that all works. Basically, the way it works is 75 cloud units is not necessarily 75 renderings. It's actually sort of allocated to an account, and it's based on, it's really the complexity, how much CPU time the rendering would actually take up. So a simple rendering will be 1 unit. A very complex rendering that uses 1200 DPI and has an awful lot of pixels would probably be more units. So, there's a whole scheme for that, and a lot of that really, how we allocate that to students and how we manage that process is really honestly emerging right now. We're trying to figure out the best way to do that because we know it's going to be a fantastic resource, and we're all just trying to understand really the best way to manage that as a resource. So we're just hanging in, waiting for any questions. Please, if you have anything you'd like to ask, go ahead and jump right in here.
At this time, there are no phone questions.
Well, that's okay. We're not going to belabor it that way. If there are no phone questions, let's go ahead and anything on for my friends online, anything that you got to be asking, just go ahead and type anything in so we can take a look at that in the chat window. Okay, how about this? As we're waiting for any last questions or kind of ideas to come in, really, if we were going to try and put this all in context for people, for our audience of educators who are really thinking about visualization, and we really want them to what are the high-level takeaways that really, if we were sharing with other educators, about the whole visualization process and what's changing now, and really even what we see changing over the next few years, what sort of things would we share as best practices to kind of get them thinking about this in a way that's really going to just really help them inspire their students to do great things and really incorporate this well into the whole classroom process. So maybe if you were sharing your best lessons out of this with other educators, what would be some of the highlights you talked about?
Well, I think there is a couple of things. I'm really interested to look at in the next few years. Number one, I think the visualization will be more about interactive. It's more about full dimension. So you can actually use in time, like a construction simulation. That is one example about 4D simulation. I'm expecting to see more about this interactivity, this kind of real-time features being integrated into the visualization process. Maybe that will be the point eventually we will merge with the gaming industry, right? You will see this video game kind of style. You can visualize your architectural design by joysticks, maybe someday. You can navigate through the entire building very, very quickly.
But we're already starting to see this whole issue of being able to walk a building in a holodeck-like environment or with virtual reality goggles, just really immersing yourself more into the environment.
Yes, and people are talking about this kind of industry merge. The film industry and gaming industry are merging together because of the technology. I think eventually the architectural visualization, you will see more this kind of alignment with this high-end film industry. I would not be surprised if you see the architectural rendering has a similar quality like the cinematic film.
Oh, I think we're definitely sort of getting there. In fact, I think one thing, in terms of learning from other disciplines, the whole notion of film craft and how really a director controls the emotional experience, through that film, it's something that we as designers have to start playing around with in the architectural front too, because it really is. We're doing a very similar thing. We're just doing it in a different medium.
Exactly. So that's one point. I think probably visualize something not exist, like future construction. But in another point of view, maybe visualize non-geometrical things like air pollution, crime data, temperature, climate change. And all of this data maybe at some point could be brought into the visualization context as well. So you can actually visualize the pollution data in some three-dimensional forms.
Fantastic. How about from your perspective, Chris? As you look at this as a third-year student, you're kind of well on your way through the whole studio process. What do you see at the edge of where we are now? What would you share with other students or with your faculty members, really relative to this visualization process and how we should be kind of working with visualization in the studios and in the classroom?
Well, what I would suggest is that a lot of us, when we enter the program, we don't really know much about these programs. We don't really know that they exist. And at least with the Penn State program, they have been, just a couple years ago, they really started to catch on to this visualization, basically, of the first-year studio almost. And so even first year, they've been teaching them Revit, they've been teaching them Rhino, and things like that. So I think that would really help with giving students options. There's not just one program that will become the be-all, end-all of architecture, of any type of modeling and rendering. Just knowing what's out there will give students the opportunity to look into it a little bit. Educational versions are all over the place, so these free downloads will help us say, okay, I download this, like Showcase, that's what I want to get into, that's what I want to learn about. Maybe I'll download that soon, load my project, and see what happens. I think it's just a lot of encouraging students to just play around with these programs and do little experiments with whatever free time they have.
Got it. So as I'm hearing what you're saying, I think it's something I try to run into in the classroom too. Is there's sort of this question, do we need to be training all the different programs, or is it really more just creating awareness of the programs? Like how do students run these programs? In your experience, do they largely sort of pick them up on their own? Like, do we need to teach them in the classroom, or is it enough to kind of point you in the right direction and say, here's a good place to go? Actually, maybe it's a good question for you too. How much training do we do versus how much of it just sort of mentoring students in terms of how to approach the whole thing?
Well, I think today, because of the power of the social media, it's very easy to find a lot of people are doing very similar things as a community.
That's how I got you meeting. I found your website online, which has fantastic examples and tutorials, and yeah, there's really a lot of good stuff out there being shared.
Yes, so I think that is the nature of the group learning. You learn something from someone else, and then you produce some of the content that you can contribute back to the community. So as a community, I think that will definitely stimulate a lot of new innovative ways to use the software. Also, it could speed up the growth of the individual. So that is what we intend to do here in Cincinnati. We do offer the class, yes, for sure, but at the same time, we do push a lot of this kind of digital content as a video format, fully online, so students can actually watch anytime they want, anywhere they want.
Fantastic. Actually, so Chris, relative to your role as a student expert, I know you're often involved in sort of training other students in terms of doing this stuff. From your perspective, how does this work? What's a good way in terms of sharing and getting students started with all these different programs? Do you host workshops, or what do you do to help the students and your other students get started with this program?
Well, workshops is one thing, and it's very helpful to explain the capabilities of these programs and to get them into some of these features that could produce some cool results in a short amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
But really, I think what the best way would be is to motivate students to explore. Say, this is what you can do. Here's some program. Here's how you can do it. Here's the tools. And allowing students to work on their own can be really beneficial. Aside from teaching them in the class, but I think that teaching in the class or in a workshop is necessary, or at least spreading the word, because otherwise we wouldn't really know about these programs.
I think a lot of it just really is creating awareness and sort of putting the challenge out there. And I think one thing that happens in the community is when you start to see other folks doing these sorts of things, you sort of wonder how you can do them too. So just that's what's so wonderful about being able to share this stuff on the web. You start to see this. Okay, fantastic. Let me just, as we wrap up, kind of just point people to a couple of resources. Ming, if you go to release the screen for a second, let me point, check that out, a little honeycomb house action. Yep. No worries. You go to stop for a second. Let me go ahead and switch over and see if I can bring up just a couple of sites I want to share with people. Okay, a few sites that everyone should know about and in terms of pursuing all this. One is the whole Autodesk education community. So it's the place where all the software exists. So in terms of being able to download Showcase or Revit or 3ds Max or Maya, any of those things, it's all here. And anyone with an education account can go ahead, an educational email address can go ahead and download this software and just start working with them for free. It's amazing. It's just readily available, no restrictions on that. Okay. Other sites that you might want to know about. In terms of getting started with putting these things into your classroom, there's a really great project that I have a fondness for because I actually have worked on it, which is called the Curriculum Project. And as far as visualization goes, there's some lessons there to help you get started. Really, actually, hang on, I'm realizing I didn't bother sharing my screen, so let me go back over there. I'm talking away and not actually showing you anything, so let me go ahead and fix that. Share my screen. There you go. Okay, so again, the education community site is right here, students.autodesk.com, and all the free software exists under this tab. You can see there's really an incredible array of stuff available for you there to download. Okay, it's pretty much everything in the Autodesk product catalog. The BIM Workshop project is at bimcurriculum.autodesk.com, and in the follow-up email, we'll actually send out some of these URLs. Don't worry about having to grab them all. The BIM curriculum has several different examples, including one just specifically on views and visualization, and another one on materials, lights, and rendering. And if you go to any of these workshops, and we go to, let me go to actually the other one, which is really more about materials, lights, and rendering. We go through some very basic stuff about how to create interior renderings, exterior renderings, show examples of what you can do in Revit. There's just all sorts of very cool stuff to get you started. And the way all these materials in this workshop work, there are video tutorials, which you students can run to help them get started. There's also often a student exercise, which is sort of an assignment that you can get the students to work on to help them explore a concept. And you can actually download data sets, so real Revit files that you can get the students to start working with today, just to get a first experience with what working with these rendering tools is like. Okay. There's also a third side I want to point you to. It's the webinar site. So if you're keen on sort of learning more about all these different things, you can go to the site. It's students.autodesk.com. There's a tab there. And this upcoming series of webinars on a series of different topics, things like, we did the visualization, we're going to have some on sustainability, and kind of thinking about product lifecycle management, how we do more engineering analysis. It's just a really fantastic series we're putting together. So I want to encourage you to go ahead and kind of take a look at that and think about ones that might be relevant to you and your classes in the future. And just, always, I'll sort of start thinking ahead about making an appointment date, because we're going to keep on trying to do these every couple of weeks, and just get a very regular series of these going to try to really have an engaged discussion and just really get going with that. So, one last call for any last questions before we sign off. Anyone out there?
Again, to ask a question, please press star 1. There are no questions, sir.
No worries. Okay, thank you all very much for attending. I want to thank my roundtable participants here, Professor Ming Tang and Chris Peterson, for being fantastic contributors to this and sharing so much of your experience and best practices. It's really great to sort of see what you're doing in the classroom, both from a professor and a student perspective, and hopefully this has been a very inspiring thing and given some of the folks who've been watching a lot of good ideas about how they can do it in their own classroom. So thank you for joining us. And again, to the folks who are online, thank you for joining us. Please make it a point to kind of stop back in, or if you follow up in the email, there'll be some websites and email addresses. So if something comes up later and you want some guidance or some help, you can stay in touch with us. So please do stay in touch. Okay, thank you. Operator, let's go ahead and shut it down for today.
Thank you for participating in today's conference. You may disconnect your lines at this time. Speakers, please stand by.
Okay, thank you all.